Hello everybody, my name is Aleishia Lewis. I'm a Deputy Head Teacher at a school with nearly 700 pupils in Southend-on-Sea in Essex. I also work as a Specialist Leader in Education for the South Essex Teaching School Alliance, which is SETSA, and through them I run middle leadership programmes, and I have funding that I'm currently using to run a BAME ethnic leadership programme for 14 teachers. I also am the moderation manager for Southend-on-Sea Borough Council, and so my kind of head is in many different areas, whether it is curriculum, whether it is English, whether it is assessment. I have lots of different hats, but one of which I'm really passionate about is identity and diversity within our curriculum, and that we need to be working more towards diversifying our curriculum in order to improve the standards, the outcomes, the experiences for all of our children. Obviously, thinking about diversity, this is not a simple thing. Diversity is huge. It involves race, it involves religion, it involves policy, it involves government, it involves so many facets. And it's not an easy task. It's not one that's going to be solved quickly. It's one that hasn't been solved even through all the years we've been talking about it so far. So we need to think about what we can do now to make a start on creating some change, because we are still in the same situation that, as I've said, we have been for a very long time. We need to start thinking about what we can actually do now from the bottom up to start making a change. So what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to do a little task for me to begin with. On a piece of paper, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and I'd like you to write down all the things you remember learning about in primary school. Now, I say all the things, very tenuously, because you won't remember everything, but there will be some things that really stand out to you. So in these next 30 seconds, I'd like you to think about what you remember from primary school. Is it people? Is it the history? Is it artists? Is it musicians? What do you remember learning about? So you've got 30 seconds, starting from now. Okay, what I'd like you to do now on your piece of paper is I'd like you to write down your ethnic background. Whatever you identify with as your ethnic background, can you please write that down underneath your list? Now, I'd like you to reflect upon your list. I want you to think about whether the things you have written down relate to your ethnic background. I want you also to think about why you remember those things the most. Do you remember them because you remember the facts about those things, or do you remember the experiences? Why is it that those things actually stood out to you? I want you to think about whether the things you've written on your list are actually valuable to the contribution that you are making to society today. Now, I'm very aware that most people watching this may be in the education business, so as educators, depending whether you're primary or secondary, some of the things you've written on your list you may still draw upon today. But is that the case for everybody? Do all those things, if you're a doctor, do those things link? If you're a blogger, do those things link? If you are a tennis player or a sports coach, do those things help you to make a valuable contribution to society today? Now, if you are looking at this from a place of a BAME background, so if you're Black, Asian, or any other minority ethnic background, I want you to look at that list and think, do you see yourself represented there? If you're coming at this from a white British or any other white background, imagine you're from another ethnic background. Where are they represented on that list? Where are the contributions of your culture, of your heritage? Where is your history and its impact on Britain today? Because we live in a very multicultural society, and all the cultures that we have brought so much richness and value to Britain today. But are we seeing that reflected in our curriculum? Now, obviously I did this myself as well, and I thought about the things that I remember mostly from primary school. So I identify I'm mixed white British and black Caribbean. On my list, the Tudors. I loved history at school. English and history were my bag. So I loved all the Tudors, Henry VIII and his 6 wives, loved them. Ancient Greeks, all the mythology stuff. I remember singing Autumn Days and If I Were a Butterfly, the absolute stalwarts of primary school singing. We still sing those songs now. I remember a lot about the Victorians, again, because it's the history. But I also remember playing the steel pans. There were 3 lessons that we had at my primary school when I was in year 3, playing the steel pans, and we played When the Saints Go Marching In. And I tell you, if you put a steel pan in front of me now, I probably could still remember playing it, because that was the only time, the first time and the only time, where I actually saw my heritage reflected in something we were doing at school. It reminded me of Notting Hill Carnival. It reminded me of going to Grenada when I was little and seeing people play the steel pans and hearing the calypso and the soca music. It was amazing. That was the first and only time in my school life that I saw my heritage reflected. Now, the past few months have obviously thrown everything up into the air, and schools are at a place where they're thinking about the impact of COVID, they're thinking about recovery curriculums, they're thinking about children's mental health, their well-being, and how we're going to recover these children back into our schools. But that's not the only thing our children have had to be dealing with, because from my own perspective, I'm a mother of 3 children. One is 9, one is 7, and one is 3. And my eldest 2, I think, have sort of dealt with the coronavirus thing. They've dealt with us being at home and mummy being teacher and deputy head from the dining room table. What they couldn't get their head around was this. Seeing this on Newsround, reading this in the first news, they couldn't get their head around this. And what was really awful was my 9-year-old sat down and he said to me, could that happen to my brothers? Because he is very light-skinned with a ginormous blonde afro, but his brothers are much darker than him. And the reality was, in 2020, I could not turn around and say no, that wouldn't happen to his brothers, because I remember being stopped when I was 7, in the car with my mum and my sister, and a policeman asking my mum on several occasions where she was going. And when she kept saying, I'm going home, I live here, he couldn't quite get his head around it, because black people don't live here. They live in London. They live in Birmingham. Where are you going? A lot of our children are dealing with questions of identity and belonging. They are dealing with that. And we have to remember that as well when they go back to school, because they have seen things like this. They have seen people coming together to protest, to make a change, to have their voices heard. And our children and our families need to have their voices heard through our curriculum as well. So why are we here? Why are you watching this right now? Why is this important? It's important because our curriculum needs decolonising and diversifying. And we'll talk about those 2 things as I go through. We need to get our children and our staff to talk about identity, race and racism. There are going to be lots of uncomfortable conversations, but they need to happen. We've sat on the fence too long about these issues. People need to get uncomfortable before they get comfortable. And all things about unconscious bias and those situations need to come to the forefront now, because the time to reflect and make change is here. The time is now. We need a curriculum that reflects all of our pupils and enables them all to achieve. We cannot keep marginalising and stereotyping some of our children. It is not right. Now, the NEU obviously did quite a lot of seminars and webinars in light of the Black Lives Matter protests. One of the speakers said this, and it really resonated with me because it's really true. They said, our education system was broken before. COVID smashed it completely. We have to build it back together in a way that creates effective change. Now, the reality is, every year as school staff, we end in July and we have all the best intentions for the next year ahead. And then we come back in September, and before you know it, we're on the conveyor belt again, and everything takes over. And before you know it, you spent a year without much change. We are never going to get this situation back again, where we are starting in September really with a clean slate. All of our children are coming back with completely different experiences over the last 4 months. We're actually at a point where we can start from a blank page. It's up to us now to build our education system back effectively. We can make the changes, and we have to do it now. So equality and diversity are two separate things, but often they do go hand in hand. Equality is legislation. It's based and focused upon the 9 protected characteristics. And if you don't know what those are, you can Google them. But equality ensures that individuals or groups that belong to any of those 9 protected characteristics are treated fairly and no less favourably specific to their needs. Equality is about the right to be equal. Diversity, however, is about focusing on recognising, respecting and valuing people's difference, and about understanding their full potential by promoting an inclusive culture for all. We have spent such a long time, years and years and years and years, teaching PSHE and teaching about how everyone is the same. But everyone isn't the same. Everybody has the right to the same rights. However, we need to celebrate the difference. And because we haven't spent enough time talking about difference and how difference is really valuable, that people cannot deal with it. Why do we have 12-year-olds being prosecuted for sending racial abuse to footballers? Why do we have our children, our families still being slandered and racially abused? And it's because people do not understand and value the difference. That's really important. Equality and diversity are a hidden curriculum, and they add value to what our children are being taught. And it's that we need to focus on, the value of diversity. Now, within the curriculum, there are 3 strands really where you can find diversity. There's the inclusive practice. That's where you're assessing the diverse needs of your pupils, maybe more on an academic basis, and you plan your curriculum delivery to incorporate those inclusive teaching strategies to meet the needs of all of the pupils and all different pupil groups. There's the citizenship aspect, where we're thinking about children developing their own rights as well as the rights of others. And that's focusing more on discrimination, on bullying, on harassment. Then there's the celebrating the diversity. Are we giving our pupils the opportunity to learn about their own identity, their own culture, and their own difference in relation to others? It's valuing the achievements of other diverse groups of people and not just focusing on this issue of white greatness. It's beyond that. Now, bringing this up with your staff can be really difficult because everybody is coming to this from a different place. There is a lot of great reading out there that can be done. Now, this book by Tiffany Jewell, this book is Anti-Racist, is a very accessible book because it is written kind of from a young adult perspective. So it's very, very easy to access. You could read it in an hour, but it's really good at pulling strands out. One of the most effective strands, one of the biggest things you're going to hear is people that say, I don't see colour. I don't see colour. I treat everybody the same. But as I've said, it's important to acknowledge and understand the difference. You need to see the colour, because if you're not actively seeing it, you're denying them of their histories. You're denying them of their racial and their ethnic background. And as Jill says, you're trying to make them the same and to fit them into the imaginary box that has been created that all white things are the best. Everything has to be white. Now, I know what it can be like as a mixed-race female growing up. Sometimes I felt too black for my white friends. And sometimes I felt too white for my black family and my black friends. A lot of our children have that. A lot of our children need to embrace their identity and their belonging. We need to see the colour. So it's time to start from the beginning. We've got this blank page. Let's use it to our advantage. We need to start thinking about what and who we are teaching our pupils about, and why are we teaching it? Why are we doing it? Are we doing it because we've always done it? Are we still doing the Tudors because we did the Tudors at primary school? Are we still doing the Victorians because we did the Victorians at primary school? We need to move beyond this. We need to think about, are there other people, other figures that we could and should be including in order for all of our children to see themselves reflected? We need to think about other knowledge of other diverse places and how that knowledge can be introduced. So it's equally important to the other more dominant knowledges that occupy our curriculum. Our curriculum is so focused on knowledge, but the problem is we're teaching our children to be knowledge factories. Where is the thinking? Where are we teaching them to question? Where are we teaching them to analyse and evaluate? Where are we teaching them to think outside of the box? That is really important. Where is the social justice in our curriculum? How are we portraying things? How are we looking at, are we becoming really classist? How are we treating everybody? Where is that social justice? And we've got to face up to the reality. Our curriculum is inadequate at reflecting the BAME lives of our pupils, but also for social class. As I've said already, our curriculum marginalises and stereotypes, and it just reinforces messages that are completely inaccurate. We need to think about starting again. So we're going to play a little game. I would like you to write down, or even just say out loud to yourself, who these people are. So, who is this? If you don't already know, that is Mary Seacole. I love Mary Seacole. I love the Mary Seacole story. Mary Seacole is the only person in the Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2 curriculum that is specifically named as a significant person to study that is not white. Now, Mary Seacole, as I've said, brilliant story, inspirational figure. But my issue with Mary Seacole, unfortunately, is that she's a nurse. Now, my mum, I remember growing up, if I had £1 for every single time somebody asked my mother if she was a nurse or if she worked in the healthcare system. Because as a black woman, surely that's the only thing you can do. Mary Seacole is brilliant. But as a black nurse, she's just reinforcing that stereotype that I grew up with. Who is this? You're probably very quick with that one. That is Neil Armstrong. But can you name this person just as quickly? That's Mae Jemison, the first black female astronaut. How inspirational is a story is hers? Her story is brilliant. We spend all the time thinking about Neil Armstrong. He's not the only person that has been in space. Who is this? This is a bit trickier. He has a very good moustache. This is Arthur Wharton. He is a black Victorian. He is known, not widely known, because people don't know who he is, but he is known as the first professional black footballer. There were lots of black footballers around. He was the first that was known to be professional within the United Kingdom. Who is this person? Now, you'll be using your active comprehension here. You'll be looking at him. Right, he's got a furry hood. Is he somewhere cold? Is he some sort of explorer? Matthew Henson was an explorer. He was part of the group that was the first to reach the North Pole. And he was actually the first person out of that group to reach the North Pole. Then we have this lady here. Who is she? Again, you might use some of the clues to work out who she is, or maybe what she does. Now, this is Junko Tabei. She was the first woman to reach the summit of Mount Everest, but also the first woman to reach the summit of all 7 summits. How remarkable is she? Now, at my school, we use her as an example in year 4, looking at significant figures within the topic of survival. The children love learning about Bear Grylls. They love learning about Shackleton. So many children were way more engaged when they learnt about Junko Tabei and her remarkable story. Then we've got this fellow. Most of us know who he is. I've sat on a tube train next to him once. I don't think anyone else knew who he was other than me or any other teachers there, but that is Michael Rosen. But do we also know who this is? This is Valerie Bloom. Absolutely amazing poet. She has an MBE for her services to poetry. And when I have done her poetry with year 5s, I absolutely love it. And so much of it links back to stories from my grandma and granddad of living in the Caribbean, and so much I've experienced over my childhood. of being from that heritage. Her poetry engages children. It is brilliant. But do our children know about these other people? They don't, and they need to. So the Black Curriculum wrote a report in early 2020. It is a brilliant report, and if you haven't read it, I would really advise you to do that, because it teaches you, it can give you a very great insight. So it says, with no mandatory place on a highly Eurocentric national curriculum, Black British history continues to be viewed as insignificant. That is very true, but it's very wrong. Now, there is the opportunity there to teach topics, including migration, belonging, and empire. They are part of the history and English curriculum in secondary schools. But the bigger point is whether children actually get to study them. Just because they're there doesn't mean that schools and exam boards choose to actually take on those topics. As it says, in its current guise, our national curriculum for history disassociates Britain from a legacy that had oppressed Black people historically in favour of a more romanticised, filtered legacy that positions Britannia as all-conquering and internally embracive of ethnic and cultural difference. The romanticisation of Britain is one that needs to be questioned. Our children need to think more about this. They need to be able to see things from another lens. They need to question more. We teach them about bias and we look at sources in history, but do we actually really teach them to question the history they are being taught? Because the reality is the contribution of Black and other minorities is often omitted. But it should feature everywhere in our curriculum. This is not just about history. This is not just about English. This is about all of our curriculum. Too often we leave talking about race and racism to history and to PSHE. It should be everywhere. Are we talking about it in geography? Are we making our students aware of Black artists and Black musicians? Because I cannot name one Black musician or artist that I learned about in primary school. I cannot name one. The Black artists and history I've learnt about have come through my mum teaching me, have come through my mum taking me to museums, taking me to places, buying me the books, showing me the history. We don't have it in our curriculum, but they need to be there because it's impactful and it's significant. There needs to be more engagement with issues of empire and slavery. We cannot keep this idea that these things only happened in America. They happened here. We need to make that a reality. Now, there is a nervousness amongst teachers. People get very, very concerned, nervous, disarmed when they talk about race history and politics and race relations. Teachers are ill-equipped. They're uncomfortable dealing with these things because they don't know it themselves, but they also don't have the language. They don't want to offend people. No one wants to do the wrong thing. So we need to arm our teachers with these skills. It's up to us to arm them. We need to make a distinction during initial teacher training, during NQT, RQT years. We need to make a distinction between being prepared to teach a diverse range of pupils from ethnic backgrounds and actually being able to competently teach about cultural diversity and diverse histories to a high standard. We cannot pay lip service. We have to do the work, we have to do the research, and we have to have the uncomfortable conversations first. We need teachers to be aware of their own unconscious bias. We need them to be aware of this because we cannot move forward unless we have really taken those things to heart. So I showed my staff, my teachers, my LSAs, a picture of the world map, the same one I'm showing you now, and I asked them, what's wrong with this? The first thing that was said after a while, it wasn't immediate, was that the UK is slap bang in the middle. That's only one of the issues with this. This is a political world map, but this is the world map that people have up in their classrooms, that are in atlases, that are on display boards, that are in cards, that's on wallpaper. The reality is the sizing of the countries is also completely inaccurate. This is still not as accurate as it could be, but it's much more accurate. And when I showed this to my staff, their faces were agog, because it's actually that realization that Africa is huge. You could pick up the whole of North America, put it in Africa. You could pick up Australia and put it in Africa. And you could put some of the Asian countries in Africa as well, and there would still be room. We spend all this time showing children this. And then they see, look how huge Greenland is. Look how huge the United States is. Look how small Africa is on there. When in reality, it is huge. We need to get our children to think about these things. Why are we using that map? Who drew that map and what were they drawing it for? Who were they drawing it for? What did they want to show? And why is it that we're still using that map rather than a more accurate one like this? Thinking is really important. And that's geography. All of these things should come through in every curriculum subject, not just history and PSHE. A central thread of an inclusive curriculum is one that fosters belonging while forging connectivity, rather than making Black, Asian and other minority ethnic pupils feel like internal immigrants within the British Isles. That's another quote from the Black Curriculums report that was written this year. This is an example I want to show you. Think about Remembrance Day. How do you mark Remembrance Day in your schools? What images do your children look at and see and explore and analyse when you're talking about Remembrance Day? Who do you have come in to speak to your pupils when it's Remembrance Day? Does your school focus on the contribution of the ethnic minorities to the war effort or not? Because we can wrongly show children that this was just a European war. Everyone that fought in it was white. The reality is completely different. Soldiers came from the West Indies. The West Indians gave money to a special fund that they created to help the war effort. There were soldiers from Africa. There were soldiers from India. There were soldiers, Black soldiers from America. We need to think about those contributions. Are we just remembering white soldiers when there are all of these other people? A diverse community, a diverse global community was part of the war effort. Do we think about those? Because if we don't, then what we're saying to children again is that only the white people made a difference in this. That's who we're thinking about. When the reality is their heritages of our BAMEed community, their background, their history was also represented in that war. Do we think about that? There's many other situations where we can talk about this, but I just wanted to use Remembrance Day as an example, because that is one that I know every single school celebrates and marks. But how are we doing that? We need to decolonise everything. So our first question to ask when we're decolonising the curriculum is, whose viewpoint is the information coming from? We have lots of information that we're giving to children, but whose viewpoint is it from? Now, decolonising means that the children will be learning a story. They might learn more than one story, but it might not necessarily be the story of the victor. Right now, we are constantly telling the stories about how great Britain is, how amazing we are. As I said, it's romanticised. Are we telling the stories of others? Professor Paul Miller is amazing. If you can read any of his work or hear him speak, he is really, really impactful in terms of thinking of decolonising the curriculum. He's recently said that diversifying is a process of reflection. It's about having that awareness of the other. Decolonisation moves on from that. It moves us from a place of just reflecting into having a real consciousness of others. And they're two separate things. You can have that awareness, but actual decolonisation is having that real consciousness of others. And we have to be really honest. We have to take a step back and look at it from a different lens, because everything within our system, our classroom routines, our classroom layout, everything has been shaped by colonisation and neoliberalism. We've got to decolonise our pedagogy. We need to think about how we are teaching. Now, thinking about it from an assessment background, it's really hard because our assessment system is making it even harder for our teachers to diversify. Because we have things like the phonics screening check. Now we're going to have baseline assessments in reception. We've got the GPS test at Key Stage 2. We've got it at Key Stage 1, although it's optional, people do it. There is so much out there that, again, marginalises and stereotypes. The phonics screening check is really difficult for our EAL pupils because they're trying to struggle with learning English, let alone throwing in these alien words in as well. It's making the diversity even harder in terms of assessment. So we've really got to think about how we can decolonise our pedagogy as well. Now, decolonising education invites us to engage and to look for alternatives, which will then create a more equal and inclusive education system and resulting society. If we continue to celebrate the difference and value the difference, we will move forward. But as I've said, we need to encourage our children and our young people to question what they are being taught more often. They need to tell us what they want to learn about. They need to have a voice. Now, English is another one of my areas, and there is so much out there in terms of text that we can use that can really help to make a difference, and they really engage the children. Hidden Figures has been written for all different age groups. That story, the history of it, is brilliant because it tackles women in science as well as the fact they are Black women in science. We spent all that time talking about Neil Armstrong. Where is the story of Katherine Johnson and the other 3 women? They are equally as important. They gave us the space race. They are impactful. They are significant. Ghost Boys, which is by Jill Parker Rhodes, and Rebound by Kwame Alexander are 2 texts that I've used with Year 6 pupils. And the children absolutely are fully engaged with them. They are fully engaged. They were way more engaged with both of those texts than they were with Goodnight, Mr. Tom. They love Goodnight, Mr. Tom, but those 2 texts put them on a whole other level. Children were going home and researching the story of Emmett Till after reading Ghost Boys. Not because I had asked them, because they wanted to know more. They were coming back with questions. They were asking me about other Black authors. Mallory Blackman, absolutely fantastic author, but she is not the only one. There is more. The Boy at the Back of the Class has obviously been, spoken about widely since it came out. It's a brilliant book, and we use it with our Year 4 pupils, thinking about as a way in to talk about refugees, the crisis in Syria, about difference, about survival. That is a really brilliant book that really touches the children. And me, as an adult, I cry every time I read it. The Proudest Blue is a brilliant story of hijab and family. It's about showing pride in being a different religion, showing pride in your culture, and it gives other children an awareness of that pride. Julian as a Mermaid tackles so many brilliant things, and obviously the story of Malala. There are so many texts that are out there. We need to access them. We need to go wider than our gene pool, because whilst Roald Dahl and Anne Fine still have their place, there is so much out there, and it is up to us to really move forward and to engage these children with a range of texts that they can actually see themselves, their backgrounds, their heritage, their friends in, to understand more about themselves and their communities in, to understand more about their past. We need to show our children that there are Black scientists. We need to show our children there are Black astronauts. We need to show our children that there are more sports beyond cricket and football. We need to be showing our children that there is difference. Julian is a Mermaid. Children can understand that book. They can understand going into the role play corner with a blank sheet and making it into all different things. We need to be showing the truth to our children, reflecting their truth in our curriculum. It's time to move on and make a change and make some noise. It's time to be the difference. Our children need to engage critically and reflectively. They need to look at the society in which they live, look at how that society has changed, and look at how Black, Asian, other minority ethnic backgrounds have added to that. We've got to focus on empowerment and well-being. And we need to also go beyond the first. We spend a lot of time when we talk about ethnic minorities in our curriculum, we always pick the first Black woman, the first Black man. What about who came after? Because sometimes for our children, being the first is a niche area. It's also really challenging. It's quite overwhelming. But actually, the fact that there were others who came after is important, because they can be one of the ones who came after. They may be the first at something, and we want to empower that, but you could also be one who came after. We've got to focus on the understanding of self and of others, and more opportunities to collaborate are needed across schools, between teachers, between families. We need that collaboration, because this is a journey that we're all on together, and none of us can do it alone. We need to get our children to open up and lead the discussion. We need to hear their voice. What do they want to learn about? How are they feeling? Where do they see themselves in the curriculum that we have so far? We have to let people share their experiences and open that discussion. Have you spoken to your BAME teachers, if you have any in school, about their experiences at school, about how they feel about our curriculum? Have you shared that experience? Have you let them? Do you have a safe space where you can talk about race issues within your staff? We need to focus on building our home and our cultural communities. And we've got to be informed. We've got to be willing to unlearn and to relearn and to do the research. Because to do this properly, we need to research it properly. This is not us paying lip service. We've got to do the work on being anti-racist, do the work on the curriculum, do the work on the history, the heritage, the cultures, the stories. And we've got to reflect the reality of our children and our young families, because we are building tomorrow's citizens. And we have to do this work everywhere, whether you are in a diverse school already or whether you are in a school that has no diversity in it. Those schools have to do even more work, because those children who live in that small white community may not live there forever. They will move out, they will go somewhere else, and they have to recognise difference. They have to recognise the value of that difference as adults. These are my grandparents. These are their original passport photos from when they came over in the late 50s from Grenada. My granddad came first, he was a fisherman, then he worked on the railways when he came over here. And my grandma, she worked as in a house servant role when she was in the Grenada, and then she came over here and she works in a glass blowing factory. That is my history. And me and my children, we have looked through their passports, all of their original passports, all of their documents in the recent weeks, because they wanted to know more about their heritage, their history. This is their history. This story coming to England is their history. It's my history. It's our truth. And this picture from Amazing Grace, a brilliant story, just reflects my childhood, sitting down and talking to my grandma while she told me stories. All of our children can relate to that, whether they're Black, white, Asian, whatever, traveller. All of our children can relate to this. So we're in a process of continual change. We don't just teach the oppression and the struggle. We teach the value, we teach the skills, we teach the insight. We need to use a lens of anti-racism to figure out what you are seeing and to take action. Jules says to us, what action are you comfortable taking? You need to think about that now. What do you feel like you can do? What action are you willing to take that goes beyond your comfort zone? And as Jules says in her book, you have the capacity to think. You can problem solve and you can make decisions. You have the power of choice. You are able to pause and reflect, so do so. We need to think about the history of identity for our children. We've got to decolonise and diversify the curriculum as a whole, reflecting on experiences for all, the whole community of the UK. And the curriculum, as the government keeps telling us, gives us room to teach more diversity. We have to make the time, we have to make the change, and we have to exploit it. We're the only ones that can do that. And as Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. It's up to us to change now and to make a difference for our pupils. Thank you.